thank you for coming to my talk, Writing a Book Using Git, How Git Can Help You Keep Organized on a Project. Writing in Git was something I did not anticipate when I set out to write a book. In my past life, I was a fiction editor and worked at a small publishing company. I'm used to working in Microsoft Word, Google Docs to sort of write and edit. And now that I'm a UX designer and consultant, I've written a lot of blogs and articles about the similarities, particularly between chess and UX. It sort of felt like a natural progression to turn these articles and blogs into a book. When it came time to start writing, Word and Google Docs actually felt more of a hindrance rather than helping me. And the blank page really seemed to get to me. I think there's something that feels kind of worse, or maybe just different, about writing nonfiction versus working in fiction. Nonfiction, someone goes to pick up a book, is there to solve a problem. And then I was going to write a book to help someone solve a problem. They're talking about like chess and UX that felt very lofty and definitely had some paralysis, going on there. So I really just needed something low pressure where I could shut off my brain and just write something, anything. Could be garbage. Doesn't matter. I just had to get that ball rolling. And it was so difficult to do that. I just wanted to talk a little bit about the content slightly more, so that way you could see what the process looks like, and hopefully it'll make a little bit more sense. So what does chess and design really mean? It might not seem like much to on the outset, but chess is a game and is also a great example of UX and UI. A player must be able to navigate and use their skills to beat their opponent. There's no element of luck. There's no dice, anything like that that puts things out of your control. It is like the rules are completely understood from the beginning. Nothing's hidden from anybody. And that is pretty true of being online. What you see is what you get on a website, right? Or on an app. And it's the same on the chessboard. When a player makes a move with a plan to do a particular thing, the opponent counters with a move that maybe they didn't anticipate. And that first player has to sort of think on their feet, look at their surroundings, figure out what to do. How do I address this new problem? And so the same thing is kind of similar on a website. If the plan isn't completely enacted, then the user isn't going to be able to think. You don't want a user to think on their feet. That's not really a good thing, because they'll just go somewhere else for that same information. So that's why when a company has a site that sells X product or Y service, if it's not clear what the user needs to do, then the user isn't going to stick to the plan that the company has created for them on this website. And then that's a big issue. So the game of chess is really just about strategy and thinking through your options. In online life, the user actually has way more options than what they need. And so then it becomes like, why do you go to this website for this thing? And that in and of itself kind of comes down to chess, right? Chess has, by move 4, like 1 million options at least of potentially moves you can make. So why does it come down to that particular move that you make? And so these are the kind of thoughts that have been sort of swirling around in my head for the last 7 months. It really just started small. It was chess and UX. And then it became, we can look at the design of the pieces. That became like a central point of sort of visual design, of branding aspects. And then it became, when you design something and it has to be coded in, then it becomes a part of the coding and what the programmers have to do. And then kind of thought about, the pieces are sort of hard coded in what they can do or cannot do. And there are limitations in both coding and the potential moves that the player can make. And so you can see how it just kind of grew and grew. And blog posts weren't really going to cut it anymore unless someone wanted to sit and read like a three-part, blog series about a particular topic. It was time for chapters and having the space to sort of dig deep into this content. My prior experience with Git is minimal at best. I've been did some freelance developing work prior to finding UX, and Git was really scary to me at first. I mean, at best I could commit something to my main branch, but that was about it. Don't ask me to make other branches or understand what pull requests were. That was like really intense because these are words that I know, but they don't mean the same thing that I know these words to mean, right? A pull request does not like exist within our regular like colloquial language. So that was really intimidating. And I was always scared that I was going to do something wrong and I was going to break it. But once I kind of got over that initial fear, I realized that I could make a file and it didn't have to be filled with code. It could just be filled with words. And that was like the epiphany moment for me, where I realized that I could use Git to write, but I could also use it to outline, and I could make a private repository with every single thought about my book, or just dump everything in there. And that felt amazing, because that gripping feeling of I'm going to write a book, solve someone's problem, was now countered with, here's a place where I can just let this stuff sit and think and mull and write as much as I want without the mental model of a word processor to like sort of hinder me. So as you can see from my screenshot here, we have each branch within the repository representing a different component of my book. So we have the introduction, we have sample chapter, my main chapter up top, or like the main branch up top. But this could really be anything. This could be like part 1, part 2, part 3, beginning, middle, end, chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3, which I'm sort of working on. And so in the end of like working through this stuff, I actually found some really great perks of writing in Git. It has a much more detailed version history than you could get on like a regular word processing like software. The transparency of, comments don't vanish like they do in Word or Google Docs. And the sort of really great thing, and probably my favorite thing, is that Git is designed to be used by multiple people. And we'll go over these more as I encountered each of them. But I just wanted you to see that, there really is like a lot that Git has to offer that doesn't come from like an out of the box word processor. So before we get into the brainstorming and organizing section, I do want to preface that this is just my way of doing things. Writing a book is very different for every person. And there's actually an adage from other like writers that writing a new project is like learning how to write all over again, because every project has its own constraints, its own limitations, and things that make it different from the previous project you worked on. And so I hope that this inspires people to sort of think of Git in different ways. So I took my epiphany moment and started at the beginning. I needed a place to organize my thoughts. Now, writers do lots of different organizing and brainstorming methods or outlining methods, and I've tried pretty much everything over the years. And I had never tried Kanban boards before, so this was a new experience for me. I was like, well, if I'm on board with this whole Git thing, like, let's just do it and try out the Kanban boards, because it doesn't hurt, right? So basically a Kanban board is these columns that you see. I've labeled them as chess foundation, strategy, thematic thoughts, etc., and it goes on. And then each of the things inside of the columns are cards that can be moved around from board to board, or from column to column. And it's basically the same thing as like a Trello board, if you have one of those. And so in my case, because I was dealing with some pretty unwieldy like components for my book, I decided to start by theme. So the theme of chess, and then the sort of digital strategy, and then how do I want to incorporate or bring these things together. That's sort of how I started looking at it, right? Like, so in digital life, the overall plan is invisible to users, but the hints are sort of in the choices that we make. And so I also needed that to be reflective in chess, right? Like, what are some of the invisible things that help players make a decision? So all the thoughts went here. Good, bad, dumb, didn't matter, just all on here. And I spent weeks, actually probably even months, just sifting through this board. And this is now the final product of what my sort of brainstorming outline looks like. Now, I'm a pretty tactile person, so I actually took the Kanban board and turned them into flashcards. And I could group my categories together sort of differently than I could in a Kanban board. But these are the building blocks of my chapters. And so it's really important for me to be able to see, like, have an overarch, like literally a bird's eye view of different components in my chapters and being able to group them together in different ways. It's basically kind of like my brain is like a giant rubber ball band. And now I need to break that giant rubber ball band into smaller rubber ball bands for them to be easier for me to sort of see them. And so that's what this was. And I just kind of took all the cards and sat on my floor and just grouped them into different components, and then transferred them back on to another Kanban board, which you'll see here. And so these are a much more readable form of my cards, my flashcards. And this might seem either too simplistic or too complicated, but for me, it was more about understanding the core content and how these things go together, because the parts of, the anecdotes or the research and things like that will fit into these categories, but I need to know where the categories go before we put the sort of surface stuff on it and actually like build the framework first. So seeing this at a high level was actually really helpful. And, so even if this wasn't perfect, that's okay, because once I start writing, I can continue to move the boards around. And I like that this outline still has the flexibility and doesn't feel so permanent, in the same way that, like, if you made a traditional outline of, 1A, 1B, 2A, 2B, that feels, for me, it just feels a little too rigid. And so I like the flexibility of being able to know that this isn't set in stone. So the first column here, we have board vision, memory, calculation. That column is actually my sample chapter. So we're going to start there and start writing. Now, it's one thing to sort of plan everything out, talk about the book with other people, but it's like another thing to actually start writing. And that is intimidating, no doubt about it. And working in Git didn't take away that initial fear of starting. And honestly, I don't think anything would, but it was at least less intimidating. And I think a big part of that was breaking the mental model of writing in a word processor, right? When you start writing, you index, you write and write and write, and then you go to the next paragraph, and then, and it builds out something resembling a book or an essay, and so by working in Git, it really forced me to sort of break that. And then it just became words on the page, then it didn't matter as much. So for example, we could look at this and we see that the line just keeps going. I just wrote until I reached the end, and then we wanted a new paragraph. Now it goes down one number or two if I made a space. And, there's no spell check or anything like that. So there's no little squiggly line sort of staring at me going, you've done this wrong. And so it was actually a relief, truly, to be like, oh, I can just write unencumbered by the mechanisms of writing in some ways, that, it's not about how well the sentence flows together right now. We're just going to write it all out, and then we'll clean it up later. So when you're done with that, say you've written everything you need to write, let's start editing. Within a small addendum, get a human editor. This could be a professional one, a coworker working on the same project as you, or just a friend. Pretty much anybody who can use GitHub and believes in you and your work. So my editor is my supervisor. So the way that me and my editor tackled it was to do a pull request. Every time there was a comment, making an edit, any sort of changes that she had in mind became a pull request. And then that could be 20 pull requests. It doesn't matter. And if you don't know what a pull request is, it's just a fancy way of saying that you made some changes to an existing version. And you just get a notification. So pull request is just a notification that changes have been made. That's it. So in this example, we have that she wants to merge, which it'll become that new version, but we'll get there. So we have no new commit from the main branch into the sample chapter. And she made a note of add headings. And then you can see down at the bottom right that it's verified and it has a commit ID. So next is to merge the pull requests. So by merging the pull requests, all we're doing is saying, yes, this new version that has been updated from the pull request is the newest version that needs to be at the top of the pile. And then all I do is just accept that merge request, and let's show you what this looks like. So this looks like a lot. I don't blame you for feeling that way, but it's pretty straightforward actually. So we have the highlighted colors. We have in red is my words. And then this green line with the blue text is actually the edited version of it. And then these blue ones are some notes that I think she left me. And that's pretty much it. Nothing too fancy. I think it's just an adjustment of what am I looking at, really. And that's pretty much it. So repeat the drafting and editing steps until complete, or if your deadline is up, whichever comes first. So let's go back to those perks of writing in Git. So we can see all my notes are listed inside the repository for every commit I've made, right? So we have create sample chapter, update sample chapter, up here is add headings. This is basically like a built-in version of Word, like your version history for a major word processor, but you can write in as many detailed things as you want. So if you wanted it to say added headings and, this particular thing was added, and then maybe several commits later, you're like, oh, I don't know if I like that. You can go back to the original one or, take out the stuff and then go back and, kind of play with it and see what works for you. It doesn't, every commit is different. So if you want to add new stuff, that's okay too. It'll still always be at the top. And then there's, there we go. So comments, added headings is the topic. And then the added H1, H2 headings to better structure the reading points. This comment never vanishes. And you can see it has a commit ID number of 95A6EA. And so if you have, let's say that you have a lot of commits and you knew that like your editor was saying, oh, in this commit ID number, you can just find that one. And that's how you can find it quickly. And so that never vanishes. And you know how on Google Docs, like, once you're done with something, you commit it, like click the check mark and it's marked as resolved, but now it's gone. And so I like that you can always see how much has changed, and that if there's ever something you want to come back to, that there's an ID number to identify it, rather than trying to search added headings over, maybe you have 50 different branches. So what are you looking for? So this is just a simple way to do that. And then here's one of those previous versions where I pulled from my branches of the different commits. And you can see this is an older version where I had just started and saved it. So you can see I just pulled that, and here's what it is. Maybe in an old draft I wrote, here's the thing about chess and design, and maybe I changed it later. And then I go, you know what? I don't know. I think I liked it originally. And I can go back and go see, oh, here's where I had it last. And now maybe I do like that. So I can just copy and paste it, or just work on this final version, depending on things. All right. So as you can see, on the main branch actually every branch has 2 pictures of me, because every commit makes a change and shows you who did it. So you can see for the sample chapter, there's 2 pictures of me plus 1. So that means that it's been, my editor has gone through and done that. So if it expanded, you would see her picture there. And so I like this because it isn't just a word processor. And I think that it really hits the nail on the head in some ways, that Git is designed to be used by multiple people. So instead of me, it could be my editor. And then, I'm drafting on one part, she's editing on another part. I think that's a really important thing, that writing doesn't happen in a vacuum. I mean, you physically write it, and that in itself is very solitary, but the outlining, the part where you brainstorm, out loud and talk with someone, even this talk was influenced by many people, because I would share my idea. Oh, I have this talk idea, and it took a lot of people to get here. And so, we are very social creatures, and even something as solitary as writing still takes many people to make it happen. And Git can do that. That's amazing. And it's not like with Microsoft Word or Google Docs, where it's more about you writing. Like, it was always first about the one person writing, and then they add social components. I feel like this is the reverse. This is the social components added first, and then it's what you make of it. In this case, writing a book. So to recap, we have Git's Kanban boards for brainstorming and organizing. You can create chapters in their own branches, or however you choose to format that. You can create files for drafting. You can use the pull requests to make edits. And then when you're ready to commit those edits, you can merge the pull requests. And that is how you write, edit, and brainstorm in Git. Thank you for attending.
Jessi, thank you so much for that amazing talk.
Well, thank you. This was so much fun. Thank you for having me.
It's so great to work with you. I am coordinator for GitKon, and I did all the speaker wrangling, and it was just a pleasure to go back and forth with you. You were very transparent and nice about everything, and that's awesome. Everybody was nice, not to say that anybody wasn't nice. Not to throw anybody under a bus. Just pointing out that it's awesome to work with you. We had some good questions coming out from the Discord. But before we get to that, actually, I had a question, and since I'm hosting, I can do what I want, and I'll ask my questions in any order I want. You show in the slides you using the built-in Monaco editor, an editor built on Monaco inside of GitKraken, so our text editor.
Okay.
Maybe no, it's not built on Monaco. The same basic background text editor that Visual Studio Code uses. Mm-hmm. So it looks and feels kind of like Visual Studio Code. There's a reason for that. They use the same underlying library. But is that what you write in, or do you have another IDE that you prefer, like Sublime Text, VS Code, or something else?
No, that's pretty much it. Like I'm
wow.
Once I find something that works, that's it. I don't mess with anything. That's it. That's just the system. That's a.
That is kind of really incredible. So this is something I've actually discussed with a lot of folks out in the world, is like, what's your IDE? And like, we show, of course, all of our examples with text editing inside of GitKraken because, well, we talk about GitKraken here at GitKraken. And it's a fully fleshed out editor, like, but it's rare. I'd say this is the first time I've ever talked to anyone, and then we're doing it publicly, that uses that as their main editor. Which that's awesome. I'm so glad that it's like an all-in-one you'd never have to leave to accomplish what you accomplish, which is pretty amazing.
Pretty much. I mean, that's the thing, right? Like, I mean, now, like, Git really scared me. And then once I started talking to people about, like, what's a good GUI to try, and they were like, you should try GitKraken. And I was like, okay, sure. And I was really amazed at how much easier it is to use, like, because, I don't know, I avoided Git for a long time. And so then once I started using GitKraken, I was like, well, that's it. I'm done. I used to use VS Code. Now I don't.
Right on. All right, so let's jump to one of the questions we got out there in the Slack. I've not heard of this organization before, NaNoWriMo.
NaNoWriMo.
I'm sorry. It's getting late in the day for me. I've been hosting all day,
Okay.
as you've seen. Have you ever participated in or found writers, aspiring writers, have you ever participated in, and for aspiring writers, do you suggest joining into NaNoWriMo?
Yes and yes. I've been doing NaNoWriMo off and on, which, if anybody doesn't know what that is, that's National Novel Writing Month, where from November 1st to November 30th, all you do is write up to 50,000 words of whatever you want. This could be a novel, it could be like your doctoral thesis, it could be rewriting stuff. It's just about sitting down and writing the story or that book or whatever the project is right in that moment and making the time for it. So that's what that is. And yes, I've been doing this since 2008 because I love it. And I highly recommend it to everybody who loves to write, because the community is really great.
That's super awesome. And we didn't put the website on there, but it's just nanowritemo.com or .org. Okay. Cool. All right. This next one's kind of more of a comment than it is a question, but this should spur some conversation here. This plus the Jamstack would be awesome for someone like Al, who writes tons of Python books, as well as having it free on a website by Creative Commons. Are you, I'd love your feedback on that. Have you built Jamstack websites? Have you built like sites for this content, or is this strictly like taking it from here, putting it into a book format, and that's how I do it?
Yeah, I've never used Jamstack, but I've heard really great things from other front-end developers who use it, and that it's super easy. But yeah, I could imagine, because I've picked up a couple of his books, and I could see how that could be really helpful.
Oh, right on. I know one of our other guests who was in the panel discussion yesterday, Tips and Tricks, Carl Alexander, he wrote a book in Markdown on object-oriented PHP. If you go find Carl Alexander's book, he wrote the whole thing. I think he used VS Code, but he used Git to manage the whole process in all branches.
Oh, that's so cool.
And Zach Wienersmith, I don't know if you're familiar with him and Saturday Morning Breakfast Cereal. He's written a couple, I think it might be up to 3 now, Choose Your Own Adventure novels. And
neat.
Yeah, and he mentions Git in one of the interviews. I don't know if he actually used it to write it, but it makes sense with branching, right? That you'd be able to branch off of branches. He did his with like a giant poster board with notes, but if you're not familiar with smbc-comic.com, Saturday Morning Breakfast Cereal. Well, I was just saying for everybody else out in the world.
Okay.
You're hip. I don't know if everybody else
He's
is.
great.
He's super great. Super nice, too. I've met him a couple times. All right, so next we had another comment. Yes, it's awesome to utilize PRs. How was that process? And you say you're working with an editor. I would love to hear the story of like introducing this idea to an editor and like trying to explain a PR to someone that's not a native Git user.
So my editor is actually my supervisor at work, and she's the one who's like, she's been like a mentor, and so she is my mentor. So she's been adamant about like keep doing this chess and UX stuff, and then once it kind of grew into this big thing, it became like, okay, so we're gonna turn this into a book. Like she was the first one to be like, you're writing a book, right? And I was like, okay, I guess I'm writing a book. And once I accepted that fact that this was going to be a book and not just a bunch of blog posts and things, then I was like, well, okay, so can you like help me with this? And she's like, of course, like I'm going to help you with this. And I'm like, okay. So that's why I say like just make sure it's someone who believes in you and knows that you can do this. And so she uses GitHub for like project management stuff, and so she is only slightly familiar with GitHub. And so I had her go through it, as you saw, and sort of make notes. And I was like, okay, so every time you have a note, just make sure you hit the pull request, because that should do. That was like my theory. I wasn't even 100% sure at that point, because she was like, I know how to do like write up an issue and use the boards and stuff. So it wasn't too hard, but it was like switching gears, right? Because all of a sudden she was like, oh, I don't know how all the like more coding stuff on GitHub works. So the pull requests, she didn't know about the squares, for example, on GitHub. And so I was kind of showing her like, oh, every time you've done something on there, it shows up as a green square, and each day the more green, it's you did more work, and no green, no work, and things like that. So yeah, so once we kind of walked through the process of her making the pull requests and then me merging them, she was like, oh, okay, and then went through and just started making all of her notes, and I was really surprised, and I was like, this is even better than what I had originally like hypothesized it would be, because of all the other, some of the stuff we talked about today about the ID codes, and just that my notes are always there. I was like, man, I didn't even think about any of this stuff when I started. I was just like, I'm just gonna start and just see what happens, right? So yeah, that's kind of how I brought her in, since she was already kind of familiar with it.
Well, right on. It's always interesting to have to teach someone Git as part of the process. Go along. So I was glad and some familiarity out there already. So I'm curious a little bit about your process. I have been using Git for maintaining my own notes for years at this point. Ever since I first realized you could do it about 6-7 years ago. Awesome. I write everything in Sublime Text, and then I make commits, not as often as I should, but they're my personal notes. I actually have a public repo out there that you can go and look at how I built my old blog.
Cool.
And I found it really helpful from time to time to have it to be able to like just get log one line and just look back through and like parse or peruse like, oh, that's where I introduced that idea, or like that's where I got that idea from, or oh, I remember writing that. And sometimes I wrote like 3 blogs in a week, and it was like I didn't commit to the end, and then my commit messages are all funky at that point. But I'm curious, like, how often do you, like, in the process of writing a book, something cohesive, stop and go back and look at your log to see, where you are and where you've been?
That's a really interesting question. Actually, I thought you were going to ask me how often I make commits, and I was like, I don't trust anything. I'll commit every like hour, But that's a good question.
Smart idea.
Yeah, I don't. It's funny because when we were talking about doing this talk, I even then I hadn't looked at the notes and like going back into my old commits and being like, what did I write about? Like my first initial aspects of like the introduction. When I started the introduction, it was just me trying to understand like what exactly I wanted to say. And then once I started on the sample chapter, it was like a completely different thing. And so I actually haven't looked at the sort of introduction to compare if that actually matches the end result of my sample chapter, of it being the way that I want it to. So I think that would be like, I'm definitely going to have to do that now, because it's always like a trip when you go back and you be like, oh, I thought that I was going to make it like this, but it's actually completely like that, And so that's always really like a fun thing to do, especially once you've actually completed that task and you can see, well, it started as this idea and then it grew and then it grew and then this kind of came in over here and this kind of came in over there. And I think that's a really fun part of the writing process, or just the creation process in general.
It's kind of a strange way to look at it, but it gives you an outlet, at least gives me an outlet of somebody I can talk to. It's me from the past, but I can like ask a question and literally say, all right, how did I find that? Oh yeah, let's go back and look at my log and see how I got there. And I will just say a plug for keeping notes in Git. The other great thing about keeping notes in a text file is grep works. There will be a number of times I'll be like, where did I see that? Like all I got to do is grep the keyword from my folder of notes, and bam, like I can see what's on the screen. So
Nice.
I recommend that as well. It's sometimes fun because grep can also count to see how many times you use a certain word. I used the word awesome 173 times out of 1 month a couple years ago, and I realized I was overusing the word awesome, but I saw a lot of awesome stuff. There's no other way to say it.
There is no overuse of the word awesome.
I completely agree with you. Your talk was awesome. Question about chess. It's surprised no one asked it out there, but like how did you end up going down the road to write a book about chess in the first place? What was like the motivation to say like, all right, I need to add my voice to the chess community?
It was because I think chess is like a very niche kind of thing, right? Niche thing.
Niche, whatever.
Niche. I don't know. I only read the word usually in the rest of it.
I was in an airport in Singapore once, and a German man said, "You pronounce it niche unless you're in America, and then it's niche."
I just got called out. Yeah. So the more I wrote about the UX stuff, because it became like this like it became like a circle, right? The more I learned about chess, the more it reminded me of design components and UX things, and the more UX stuff I continued to learn about and use in my like day-to-day work, the more it made me think about chess. And I was just like, oh man, this is a vicious cycle, right? And that's when I started writing those blog posts and articles and things. And then once I realized that kind of I could appeal to a different kind of audience, right? It could be the chess industry, it could be the design industry, it could be people looking for particular ways to do things. Something that I think chess industry in general kind of has an issue with, and it's not like a knock on them, it's just that like chess websites, for example, are made for chess players and by chess players, and they're not beginners. And so how do you deal with coming into a space where everything's already understood but not really explained in a way that, at least to me, makes sense? And that's when I was like, oh, so I can use this interesting example to show why these things are important. And something kind of like Git is pretty similar, where everybody has all the terms and like things like that, and then you come into it as a beginner and you go, oh my god, like I don't know what that means, merge what, like no, rebase, oh I don't know, and so then it becomes like, how do you distill that information that's already understood and maybe not spoken about as well? I mean, like to explain, what git log is, or even just working in the terminal if you're not used to that. It became like an interesting analogy of, okay, how do you get information across in a way that makes sense, that's not going to be overwhelming? And then how do you design for that? And that's when I was like, okay, but this stuff can't fit in a blog post anymore. And so I was like, okay, I'll just try writing like a blog post about why this is important, why chess and UX is important. And then my editor, my supervisor, she's like, you just wrote the intro for your book. And I was like, God dang it. You kind of can't escape it after a while. And I was just like, okay, I can't escape it. I have to write the book. Even if like nobody reads it, I just have to write it, prove it to myself.
It's that's the best reason to write anything. If you listen to like artists like Charles Bukowski, like unless you have to sit on your hands to stop yourself from doing it, don't do it. And unless it's going to roar out of you like the sun, don't do it. And it sounded like you had something to say, and I'm glad you did. We've come a long way in the state of chess publications. My first experience with the chess book, I was a kid and it was my brother's book, but it was I'll never forget, it was a mimeographed copy of, it's a very small book, but Miguel Najorf's King of the King's Indian Defense. It was like a edition he had in the 70s. It might not have been his book, but it's the same cover. But I'll never forget, it was like the blue mimeographed. It was like before Xerox, or Xerox existed. But now we're literally bringing it into the 21st century with Git. So where can people find out more about how to get involved in chess, learning chess? Where would you send someone that's like, hey, this sounds great. I already know Git, but I would love to learn more about them.
Ooh, that's an interesting question because there's so many resources available, and that's I would say if you go to like Lichess, which is it's Li and then chess.org, I think. It's an open source chess website that's run, completely free, and they have a really good like system of just kind of introducing you to how to play chess. The other one that I used when I first started playing chess was an app called Magnus Trainer, and that also did a really good job of making it kind of gamified, which was pretty fun. But the community, I think, on Lichess is pretty fun. So I would say either start there or then message me on Twitter, and then I can help you with other stuff too. So because I'm still navigating as a new person to chess, so I feel that.
Cool. And we have one last comment roll in that I thought it would be a good way to end it, just to get your general thoughts and shout out to folks that opinions to send out to folks who haven't really thought of this before, like non-code uses of Git. What would you say to folks, to encourage them?
I say don't be scared of the labels, like the terms, right? Like pull request or merge. Try to keep an open mind, because I certainly initially did not have an open mind about Git. I was just like so scared of it. But actually, like, there's so much potential and so much power in using Git for in non-developer ways, that if you can kind of get past the uncomfortableness of understanding, the initial language of just how to commit something, then, keep at it, and it'll get easier, especially when you know what eventually, like once you learn what it is, how you want to use it, right? I didn't really appreciate Git truly until I got like GitKraken and started adding all of my like book stuff, and now I'm like, oh, okay, the sky's the limit, right? Because I have something I want to work on, and how do I go from there, and how does Git play a role, rather than the aspect of just having to learn it, like I have to learn this, right? But like, why do you have to learn this? What do you want to achieve that Git can help you with?